Hi everybody, I'm Victoria Robb, but please call me Vicky. I'm the Education Manager for the National Mining Museum Scotland. I'm trying to remember what I actually wrote in my CV, but I've worked for the Mining Museum. I've worked for the Mining Museum for over 5 years now. Obviously before COVID, I did most of the community outreach for the museum, as well as working with adult community groups, as well as schools and young people across the whole of Scotland. So I'm just a gentle reminder to please mute yourselves. And it is recording now. If you don't want it to be seen, turn your camera off. And I'm going to cover today, I will, if more people come along, I will admit them. And then questions, I will take any questions at the end. So with all that said and done, I think that covers my, my housekeeping, as it were. So I'm going to cover a bit of overview of mining in general in Scotland. I'll go in a fairly chronological order with some tangents. I'll demonstrate some mining objects. I'll focus on some key moments in mining history in Scotland, and then really focus on the Lothian and East Lothian coalfields. So we are based, I work at the National Mining Museum Scotland. We are based at the Lady Victoria Colliery in Newton Grange, which is photographed here. It was opened in 1895 and was a Victorian super pit. It closed in 1981 and shortly afterwards became the museum it is today. We are an independent charity and rely on external funders and amazing visitors to help us continue our mission to preserve and promote Scotland's mining history and heritage for current and future generations. So I've covered what we're going, and without further ado, we'll get started. Now, coal has had a profound impact on both the people and the landscape of central Scotland. At its peak in the early 20th century, the Scottish coal industry directly employed almost 150,000 people. It had become a massive industry which fueled a complex economy at the heart of the British Empire, and which exported coal throughout the world. The history of mining in the Lothians is dominated by coal, although other minerals like clay, ironstone, lime and sandstone were also worked. One of the most conspicuous reminders of mineral extraction are the vast bings of spent shale that dominate the landscapes in West Lothian and what was the southwest corner of Mid Lothian. They testify to the scale of the oil industry that flourished for over 100 years from the 1850s. This map and this website is super. It's actually an interactive map. This is a screenshot of it. So if anybody wants to go and look at it, when you hover over the different areas, it pinpoints and will highlight key pits from those areas. It's a really super website. I'd recommend it. Now, coal has been mined in the Lothians for centuries. The Midlothian or Esk Basin coalfield is like a huge bath, 9 miles long and about 4.5 miles wide. It ran roughly southwest to northeast, with Gorebridge and Pennycook at one end and Portobello and Long Nidri at the other. The basin, which gets deeper at its head out in the Firth of Forth, is made up of numerous seams which outcrop around the edge at various places. With that said, however, if the Midlothian coalfield is like a bath, the East Lothian field is like a wash-hand basin of about 30 square metres on the east side of the Roman Camp Ridge. Neither coalfield observes the man-made county boundaries. Carbery and Wallingford pits operated in the East Lothian field, while Prestonpans pits worked the Midlothian one. The first mention of coal in Scotland is found in a charter granted in 1291 to the abbot and convent of Dunfermline, giving them the privilege of digging coal in the lands of Pitt and Crieff. But the first workers of the mineral are supposed to have been the monks of Newbattle Abbey, which is just 10 minutes up the road from us at the Lady Victoria Colliery and photographed here. The monastic communities across the east coast of Scotland did exploit coal, mainly for kilns and salt panning. The selling of salt, amongst other things, bolstered their wealth, which led to one thing after the other, but the Reformation is a topic for another day. So the general population really didn't use coal, preferring wood and peat for domestic purposes. And it wasn't until the 17th century onwards that coal really came to the forefront of people's minds for industry and domestic purposes. Therefore, after the Reformation and as we move into the 17th century, the big landowners took over. They developed coal workings as commercial enterprises, and in the 17th and early 18th centuries, most of Scotland's coal actually came from around Fife and Lothian's coasts. Much of it was exported, and the Forth became one of the busiest trading areas in the British Isles and the centre of the salt industry. However, coal workings and salt pans were dangerous and unpleasant places, and by the early 17th century, it was proving difficult to recruit and keep people to work in them. The Scottish Parliament, anxious to avoid disruption to such important industries, passed a law in 1606 to protect them. Sadly, the Act effectively tied colliers and salters to their overlord like serfs. Men were regarded as part of the mine, and they were unable to leave to find other work without the permission of their overlord, and since that was unlikely to be granted, they were stuck. If they left of their own accord, they were deemed to have stolen themselves from their employer. So pictured here is a serf collar, which is currently on display in the museum. The law remained until 1799, but the legacy lingered on long after in the minds of the landowners and the miners. As we're in the 1700s right now, I would be remiss not to mention the wagonway. So Scotland's earliest railway was a wooden railed wagonway laid in 1722 to connect collieries at Tranent to the harbour at Cockenzie. In 1745, Sir John Cope deployed his troops along it in an attempt to stop Bonnie Prince Charlie from marching on England, but at the Battle of Prestonpans, the Jacobites cut them to pieces. The wagonway went back to carrying coal and was fitted with iron rails in 1815. By the 1870s, only the end of the tram line near Tranent was in use, and full gauge track was laid astride the old rails. The main Edinburgh to Berwick railway line crossed there we go. The main Edinburgh to Berwick railway line crossed the old wagonway at Meadow Mill, photographed here much later than the period I'm talking about. A washery was set up there to treat coal from Bankton Colliery, which was sunk about 1901 in association with Preston Links Colliery. Now, as we move forwards out of the 18th to 19th centuries, we turn back to the miners themselves. So prior to 1842, we know that men, women and children as young as 5 years old went down the mines. On the 4th of July, 1838, at Husker Pit in Silkstone Common near Barnsley, 26 children lost their lives in one tragic accident. Public concern for the welfare of children had already been mounting since the 1833 Factory Act, but this accident made it more urgent to take action. And in 1840, the Children's Employment Commission was set up and 4 commissioners were appointed to collect and compile evidence for the commission. Britain was divided into districts, and they inspected and interviewed a wide range of people, from not only the coal mine owners and managers, but to the actual miners and children themselves. Very significantly, and for the first time, drawings were also included to show exactly what the commissioners saw. These pictures here shown on the screen are actual drawings from the report, and I'd like to read 2 short extracts from 1841 from 2 miners at Elphiston. That's just between Elphiston and Ormiston Colliery. So the first one is from a boy 8 years old. He was a coal putter and his name was William Wilson. Assist Sister Margaret to push the carts on the railroad in the pit. Mothers takes us down at 6 in the morning and we can come away with her at night. Gets broth or some such like, has been obliged to gang when the lamp would no burn and scramble to get up. Like daylight better than dark, it is awful dark in the pit. Never been to school. A teacher came here last week and father's going to send me. Sister has been 1 week at school. She likes it fine. We are to wash and change ourselves before we gang to school. The next one is from Janet Dawson, 17 years old, and she draws coal, which is also a putter. I work 12 hours below ground and have done so more than 6 years. The work is very severe. When the cart is on the brae, I'm obliged to get another putter to give me a lift. Often been injured, I'm now laid aside, having lost the tops of my 2 middle fingers. Been idle 8 days. I do not know whether work above would suit me, as I've been so long in the pit, never tried other labour. I can read, never was taught writing, can make my own pit clothes, can earn, when full employed, 14 shillings a day. Which is quite horrible, and believe it or not, they're not the worst accounts of what the children faced underground, but they do reference some of the jobs that they do. So the first one from Janet, there, when she mentioned being a putter, the picture on the right hand side, that's what a putter did. They were in charge of drawing the coal hutches, the wee wagons, from the coal face to the bottom of the shaft. Often they had a leather belt placed around their waist and chained to the wagon, and when she'd said that she needed a hand, so often you were pulling it and other people were helping push, because bearing in mind these were not straight roads. They would had a lot up and down, steep grades to them, and not smooth roadways at all. It was very hard going. Second job I want to mention is the bottom picture on your screen. That's the trapper. The trapper's job was the most important job underground, in my opinion. They were in charge of opening the trap door at, along the coal road. That trap door let the hutches come in and out and go past it, but it also, that was their source of ventilation. At this point, there's no second shaft to allow air ventilation. By opening and closing that door, you could potentially suffocate people. They were very strict, and there were documented interviews of sitting for 12 hours in the heat and also the wet, because it would be very, very wet, especially East Lothian pits were very wet. So you'd be sitting in the heat for 12 hours a day, opening and closing that door. If you fell asleep while you were sitting in the dark, they would cane you. So they took that job very seriously, and it was a very important job. The other job that children helped with was hewing, so physically shoving the coal that the older boys and men had dug out into the wagons. And the one that's pictured above is the bearer. That's generally what older women and mothers did. So you'd have these wicker baskets placed on your back, and you carry the coal to the surface. So the public were shocked with the findings of the commission report, partly because of the horrible conditions and injuries, but also in part because they recorded that men and women often worked together in a state of undress, and that women were often found to be wearing trousers. Victorian society were pretty scandalised by this, but in any event, due to the findings of the report, women and children under the age of 10 were banned from working underground. For those aged 10 and up, it was many more years before the age was raised, and it was still a very hard and dangerous life. So we are really lucky to have this photograph of the McEwen family, as on the back of it, someone very helpfully recorded a good bit of their family history. And I wanted to show you this as it is a typical mining family. The photo was taken around 1900 and shows the McEwen family in their Sunday best. They lived in Spittal Row, just outside Blantyre. Mr. McEwen was Irish and moved to Scotland to work in the Scottish pits, and Mrs. McEwen came from a more prosperous Glasgow family who actually disowned her when she married him. This short poem reflects common sentiments at the time. The day ye marry a collier chiel, that's the day you'll ne'er do well. A gee wee poke will haud your meal the day ye marry a collier. However, they had 10 children, 8 survived, and because they all worked in the pits, the family enjoyed a tolerable level of security. The wee boy at the front of the photo left the pits due to ill health and became an active member in the Communist Party. The girls all worked on the picking tables at the surface until they married. The older boys all worked underground. One worked as a tramp brusher. That was a really scary, really dangerous job, which meant he cleared the roads for the miners to go in and set the pit props. Another one worked as a fireman, and the oldest brother was a miner, but his career ended only a few years after this photograph was taken, as he went blind from Glennie blink, an eye disorder caused by the dim light. So overall, a typical mining family. While injuries from accidents and health conditions or illnesses were all very common amongst miners across the country, miners also had to contend with dangerous gases. Unfortunately, one of the worst explosions in mining history took place in Scotland in Lanarkshire. On the 22nd of October 1877, an explosion of methane, commonly known as fire damp, ripped through the splint coal workings of numbers 2 and 3 pits of William Dixon's Blantyre colliery. Over 207 men killed, the youngest a boy of 11. The accident left 92 widows and 250 children without fathers. In the following 2 years, there were further 2 more explosions, killing 6 and then 28 people. I mentioned Blantyre to highlight the dangers that Scottish miners faced, but also in the same year, 1877, there was a gas explosion at Preston Grange colliery, which killed 2 men and a boy. Unexpectedly, in light of several major explosions, a race began to create a safety lamp that would provide miners with light while reducing the risk of carrying a naked flame. The 2 main gases found underground was black damp, which was carbon dioxide and really meant there was a lack of oxygen in the air, and this was heavier than air, so it would be found along the bottom of the tunnel down at your feet. And this one, again, as part of why I mentioned that the trapper's job is so important for ventilation, in order, if opening and closing that door to help circulate the air and also push on the gases. So that was another reason why it was so important. And the second one, which the miner here is testing for, is fire damp methane gas. Candles and then tallow lamps. I'll show this one properly in a second. I'm just holding it up now. Candles and then tallow lamps like this one were used, were obviously, so you're carrying around naked flame, they were brass or tin containers filled with animal fat tallow, and the miners would hook them onto their flat cap and walk about. But as you can imagine, methane fire damp, it's lighter than air, it's found at the top. So if you're walking through the tunnel with your candle, your naked flame up at your head, yeah, it was no wonder that it was so dangerous. Miners did have to provide their own equipment, and many did continue to use tallow lamps for up to 30 years after the introduction of the carbide lamp in 1905. So I'm going to pause sharing for 1 second, and I'm just going to show you some of the lamps. Right. So the carbide lamp, it was invented in 1905. So I'll quickly show that one first. And this is it here. So the bottom half, so one container had calcium carbide, and the top one had water. When it was mixed together, it emitted ethane gas, which would burn with a bright flame. It still doesn't seem the safest, but there we go. So we've got this carbide lamp here. Now, methane gas, as I just told you, it caused, a lot of miners lost their lives due to fire damp and methane explosions. So this here is an original Davy lamp. It is over 200 years old. And Sir Humphrey Davy, he was the one who invented metal gauze, this stuff in the middle here. And it seems simple now, but back then it wasn't quite. He was one who discovered gas and air can go through the metal gauze, but the flame can't. So when it hit methane, it would burn a lot brighter. I sure wouldn't like to be holding it, but there would be no more explosions. Brilliant. However, it didn't emit a lot of light, and they improved on it as the years went on until we get to the Glennie. And I think everybody's seen a Glennie at some point, but just to say, so there's 2 layers of the metal gauze inside here. These are the air vents, and the flame would burn inside, because now we've got our good solid glass that's less likely to break. I did have this lit, but my wick is gone, so we can't see the flame. But the miners would be trained so that they could look at the size and shape of the flame burning inside to actually tell how much methane was there. It worked twofold, so you could hold it up and use your aspirator bulb if you couldn't reach the top. And this was for taking a sample of the air to put into your lamp, for testing for methane, fire damp, but you could also hang it down below, and if the flame went out, you knew you were in the presence of black damp, so that carbon dioxide. So those were the ones, and I'll show, and that was the wee tallow lamp that I'd mentioned before as well. It does have a bit of a pungent smell to it. So I'm going to share the screen again. Right. Can everyone see that again? Gavin, can you give me a wee thumbs up if you can see that again? Or you can see it, like, that's perfect.
Yeah, that seems to be good. Good to me anyway.
Thank you. So, safety measures did start to be introduced, and many became law, such as the Mines Act of 1911, and included having a second shaft for ventilation and as an emergency exit, and that all pits that employed over 100 men had to have at least 5 trained rescue miners. Much later, electric lamps were introduced in the late 1940s, although carbide lamps actually continued to be used until they were banned completely in 1960s. Now I'm going to show you this photograph. I'm going to go on a wee tangent, if it's going to let me. There we go. So this one's at New Craig Hall, and on the photograph on the left is a miner using his carbide lamp. It's 1957, so just a couple of years before they were banned. But this photograph was in 1957. So New Craig Hall was also called Klondike, and he's highlighting it's for the shot firers. They're stemming in the shot holes right now. Yeah, so I wanted to highlight that, but I also wanted to, I love this story, but I don't know why, but it sort of tickles me. There was an incident at this pit during World War II that actually brought the pit to a standstill. So as we know, during World War II and both wars, coal was vital for the war effort, and miners were exempt from conscription, and later 1 in 10 men were actually conscripted to the pits themselves, known as Bevan Boys. This was seen, however, in August 1943, 2 New Craighall men refused to go underground as they were instructed to. This was seen as a breach to the National Service Order, and they were sentenced at Edinburgh Sheriff Court to a month's imprisonment. A strike in support of them by 200 night shift workers escalated to include all 1,500 men at the colliery. So sending them all to prison was a bit impractical and a bit silly, so to say the least. So to resolve it, the other miners talked the two imprisoned miners into actually coming back to work underground. So there's just a wee story about New Craighall for you. Now, to look at East Lothian itself. Its coal mines were relatively modest in both number and scale compared with its neighbours in Mid Lothian and Fife, but they did extend under the Firth of Forth. As discussed, many centuries of mining activity in East Lothian had fueled some important local industries, including the salt pans, but also glass and ceramic works. However, 1947 vesting day, when the coal mines were nationalised and taken over by the National Coal Board, NCB, only 6 collieries were taken on. Of these, Preston Links and Preston Grange near Prestonpans were easily the largest, the former having an average workforce of almost 800 miners in the ensuing years. Only one other colliery, Fleets near Tranent, employed more than 500 men annually. The industry peaked in East Lothian in 1948, employing a total of just over 3,000 people. The mines, which produced a range of house, steam and gas coals, were operated by several different companies prior to nationalisation, including the Edinburgh Collieries Company, the Ormiston Coal Company, and one of the more significant companies was the Summerlee Iron Company of Coatbridge, which acquired Preston Grange Colliery in 1895. Now, let's take a wee closer look at Preston Grange, which is the photograph of it is up here. With the coal outcroppings close to the sea, we know coal has been used for salt panning for centuries. Preston Grange Colliery itself developed later as a number of shallow self-draining mines and remained this way until a Newcastle mining engineer, Matthias Dunn, took out a lease and sunk 2 shafts. However, he gave the pit up around 1838, and it appears from that point onwards to be worked intermittently by the Grant Sutty family. It was reopened in 1874 by the Preston Grange Coal and Iron Company. The number 2 shaft was redeveloped to work the dual coal, and the number 1 shaft used to pump the huge quantities of water in the pit. So a beam pumping engine made in Cornwall was installed and remained in service from that point until 1954, and it's still there today. If anybody goes along to see it, it's pretty awesome. The colliery remained under the ownership of the Grant Suttys of Preston Grange House until 1895, when the Summerlee and Moss End Iron and Steel Company took over. They started redeveloping, sank a ventilation shaft and increased output to 500 tonnes a day. Preston Grange also produced a good quality of fire clay, which meant to make fire bricks, tiles and pipes. You can see the beehive shaped kilns in the photograph here, the ones at the front of the photograph. When the NCB took over in 1947, they rebuilt the kilns and carried out other redevelopment work at the pit, including new pit head baths, which were actually the 100th in the whole of Scotland to be built. So Preston Grange finally closed though in 1962. Now, photographed here on the right is Summerlee Street. The Summerlee Iron Company moved mining families from Lanarkshire to Prestonpans to work in their newly acquired pit. They built this street of brick, upstairs, downstairs houses and named it Summerlee Street. There's quite a contrast between these miners' housing and the Preston Grange house at the Royal Musselburgh Golf Club, the home of the former coal owners, the Grant Sutty family. So let's move on to Preston Links Colliery. It was started and ran by Nemo & Co, but Edinburgh Collieries took it over in 1912, and it still operated at the time of nationalisation. The Coal Board initially predicted a long life for Preston Links, but this didn't last, and they slowed production in 1962 and closed it in 1964. This gave rise to widely held view amongst former miners that it was sacrificed to make way for Cockenzie Power Station, which was built on top of the site soon after its closure. Many of the men were bused daily to Monkton Hall Colliery, which provided coal for the Cockenzie power station. Now, I'll fleetingly mention Fleet's Colliery. Sorry, I couldn't resist that pun. It was operated by the Edinburgh Collieries Company prior to nationalisation and produced coal for house, steam and gas. I love this photograph because it does really show how much like our industrial landscape has changed, especially from the Bing, and yeah, I really like that photo. And Fleet's Colliery, it closed in 1959. During the late 1940s and early 1950s, the NCB commenced 3 new drift mine projects at Bellyford, Meadowmill and Winton, all 3 lasting more than a decade. Indeed, with the exception of Limeyland and Tynemount, both of which closed in the early 1950s, the East Lothian coal industry was eradicated in a 5-year period between 1958 and 1963. 4 small private mines operated in East Lothian in this period, and the last of these mines ceased to operate in 1987. However, substantial open cast projects, particularly near Tranent, ensured that the county continued to produce significant quantities of coal. There's no sound to this video, but I'm just going to let it play in the background if it's going to do it. Yes, it is. So as mentioned, with the closure of the 2 largest pits at Preston Grange in 1962 and Preston Links in 1963, East Lothian's significant deep coal mining came to an end. Preston Grange stands today as a fantastic museum, but Preston Links was demolished shortly afterwards to make way for Cockenzie Power Station, which in itself has now been demolished as well. We no longer have any deep coal mines in Scotland, the last closing in Longana in 2002, and we are moving towards carbon net zero and renewable energy. However, we do still need to remember that Scotland was built on coal. The industry was the backbone of many communities, and there are important lessons to be learned from it. So what's next for the story of Scotland's energy journey? It's not something I can answer, but it is something for all of us to consider. And I'll finish my wee presentation with a poem from Yvonne Smith. It's called Was It Worth It? So was it worth it all those years ago? My answer, friends, is definitely no. Seeing your men going down that dark hole, clawing at the earth for black coal, their bodies marked and heavily scarred, tired and grumpy from working so hard. But ask those old men, miners of old, they'd answer yes, they enjoyed digging for black gold. We knew no different, they would say. It was our job, working hard for little pay. The valley now is void of mines. Gone are the turning wheels, big holes and tram lines. The land is now picturesque and green. No sign of coal or colliers are to be seen. So, with that, I'd like to say thank you all very much for listening.